going to do my very, very best to explain this section of the Constitution to you. This section is under Article 1, Section 8, and the entire section is one long sentence, and there's a whole list of things. So this entire section is a complete thought, and it's all together. It stays together, it's glued together. You can't pick it apart. And you can't pick it apart because it's one sentence. It's a list of things to be done in a certain place and done a certain way, okay? So I'm gonna skip going over the list, but I'm gonna go over the list at the end, the list of things that they can do. Okay, so if you want to get out your Constitution, and I prefer the Heritage Foundation because it's the most true to capitalization and wording. And go to Article 1, Section 8, okay? So Article 1, Section 8 is a list. And if you go back up to the very first article in the first sentence, this is just paraphrased, so go back and read it. The Congress shall have legislative power, that's the lawmaking power of the United States. In another video, I explained to you that the word of, when used geographically, means within. So what I do is I replace, whenever they're using of in a geographical sense, I replace it with the word within. So Article 1, Congress shall have legislative power within the United States. Okay, now a lot of people, 90% of people think the United States is a country and it's all of America. It's not. It's a certain specific places within the states. Okay, now if you go to the book that I suggest, which is actually a 2-part congressional report printed by the federal government, it explains all of this that I'm going to tell you. And it's also in the Federalist Papers. Although the synopsis given to the Federalist Papers I don't agree with because it contradicts itself. And I'll read that to you. But if you look at Article 1, Section 8, it tells you, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, it tells you, okay? So Article 1, Section 8, from 1 to 16, Clause 1 to 16, is a list of things that need to be done or things that need to be built, okay? And the Congress has the power within the United States to do these things. So let's replace the United States with federal lands. So Congress shall have legislative power within the federal lands, okay, or on the federal lands. So the things that they can do is to make laws for the federal lands, okay? They have exclusive legislative jurisdiction to do the whole list of things under Article 1, Section 8 on the federal lands. And that's in the book that I recommend, and I'll tell you the book at the end if this is the first video you're watching and you haven't seen it. So where can they do these things? So that's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. They can do them in the federal areas within the states. The states annexed some lands to the federal government to make laws exclusively without interference of the state, to make laws on the federal lands, okay? Those federal lands are the seat, according to the Constitution. Anything not the seat and not lands purchased do not belong to the federal government. and they cannot make laws for them unless they do it unconstitutionally. Or if you've seen my video on positive law, jurisdiction, and sovereignty and authority, you'll understand that all the titles without a positive law citation are business contracts. Business contracts between the federal government and the state. So those laws for those lands and those lands themselves are not a part of the Constitution. The seat and the lands purchased were supposed to be for defense purposes. Okay, that's defense with a C. They rewrote it defense with an S. That's a misspelling because defense with a C comes from Old French and it means fortification. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks of vengeance. Defense with an S is Latin for vengeance. Okay? So this was for defense with the C, and I have a very hard time reconciling that the men who wrote the Constitution were smart enough to do all that, but didn't know how to spell defense. I'm pretty sure they spelled it exactly the way they meant it. Okay, so Article 1, Section 8, and this is Clause 18. What can they do on those lands? To make the laws is the list of things that they can do within the United States or on the federal lands that are necessary and proper. And this, they've got other wording in there. You'll have to go back and look. By this government within the federal lands or any department or officer thereof, meaning they're within the federal lands. Okay? So let's look at this now backwards. Okay? It's saying the laws are made on the federal lands. The federal lands are the seat and the lands purchased. And here's what they can do. So let's do some word replacement with the list of things that they can do. So the first thing is lay and collect taxes. So lay and collect taxes, or the federal government has the power to lay and collect taxes on the federal lands. So like a lot of people say that's what she said or that's what he said. That's kind of what we're doing here on the federal lands. To lay and collect taxes on the federal lands. Duties and imposts and excise on the federal lands. Pay debts and provide for common defense on the federal lands. General welfare of the United States, the federal lands, on the federal lands. The general welfare clause, how many times do they use that against us? Well, we have to give everybody a COVID test, and we have to give everybody a vaccine, and we have to close things down. Well, if the United States is the federal lands, then the Constitution says general welfare of the federal lands, of the military, because that's what the defense, lands purchased for defense and the seat was for military purpose on the federal lands, for defense, for fortification. Defense with the C is fortification. To borrow money on the credit of the federal lands. Let's see, to regulate commerce with foreign nations on the federal lands. So it's them, the seat is regulating the lands purchased. Foreign commerce purchased, commerce. You go on a military base, they have a commissary or a PX. And if you look up the common law definition of commerce, it includes, among other things, wartime traffic. Traffic is commerce. So the traffic coming on and off the federal lands, it has a right to regulate that because it was only given exclusive legislative jurisdiction on the federal lands, exclusive. So the federal government has the sole power to make law on federal lands. And the state had to agree to that. That was when they ratified by so-called joining the union. Okay? All the other things the state kept to itself. It says that in here too. Uniform rule of naturalization on federal lands. And among several states and with the Indian tribes, okay? That's, I guess, an exception. To rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the bankruptcies throughout the federal lands. To coin money and regulate it on the federal lands. And they can regulate the foreign coin. So when a state such as, let's just use example, Republic of Texas, and I like to use Texas because I know the most about it, and I know the most about it because that's where I am. And I'm not actually from state of Texas, because state of Texas is a business contract between the Republic of Texas and the federal government. So, foreign coin, Republic of Texas should have its own foreign coin. And then when transferred back and forth between the Republic of Texas and the annexed lands belonging to the federal government would have the right to regulate it. Okay, and we have a lot of military bases overseas in other countries, and so they would have the right to regulate that currency, the currency of that country. Fix the standards of weights and measures on federal lands. That's the only place where they have the right to make exclusive legislative laws. And remember, laws is a capital L. That means they're specific. This is what they can do. Specific laws in specific places for specific purposes. The next is provide punishment for counterfeiting securities on federal lands. So here's a little opportunity for me to take to explain to you if a person in the Republic of Texas, in other words, not a federal officer or employee, goes on to a military post and commits a crime and then goes off, the federal government has a right to go and get them and bring them back and make them pay for their crime. So punishment of counterfeiting on federal lands. Promote the progress of sciences and useful arts. And this was intended to be for making weapons. They have like military bands, play music, so they can promote musicians and making music or art. You know, they have war art, pictures, photography. Okay, and right to their respective writings and discoveries on federal lands. Okay, define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. The federal government on the high seas, they're just acknowledging that in a time of war, when the Congress is supposed to be active, and other times it's supposed to be peaceful and they're not supposed to be up there 24/7 like they are now, then they would be able, they're giving themselves the right to punish for the crimes committed against them, okay, and the law of nations. Okay, lost my place. Okay, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court on federal lands, military courts, because the Supreme Court is supposed to be in Washington at the seat, right? Let's see, provided for a navy on federal lands, which includes ports and dockyards, okay? Armies, the land forces on federal lands, and they can come off to fight wars. That's what they're supposed to do. And actually, they could stay on federal lands because really it's officers on the federal lands. And the military, the militia, were constituted by private people, privates. That's why they were called privates. And they were people of the state. And the people of the state would fight in the militia under a federal officer. Okay? Now we have a federal draft, which is also unconstitutional. There's nothing in here that says that the right of the federal government to have a federal draft. Originally, the states understood it as the states having the right to draft their own people and to make the laws of who would be drafted. So if one state, it was done by population, of course, but one state could make laws that if you were over 50, you couldn't be drafted. If you were a single parent, you couldn't be drafted. If you were under 16, you couldn't be. And every state had the right to make its own laws as to who it would draft into the military, into the militia, to serve under a federal officer. But when the government started changing that, the states started writing complaints about it, and then you can find those complaints online. They're really old, and there's not that many of them, and some of them are newspaper clippings. So you can find them, you just have to look. Okay, so the federal government would organize the militia, discipline the militia, okay? So in organizing the militia, they're not saying that they're taking the power to draft, okay? They're taking the power to all the states to say, okay, you have this many people, you have this many people, you have this many people. And then the officers of the federal lands in that particular state would be sure that these militias would have everything they needed to fight, their necessities, which included arms. Okay? To exercise exclusive legislative jurisdiction. Okay, exclusive legislation in all cases. That's what we're talking about. That's in 17, Article 1, Section 8, 17, where it talks about exclusive legislative jurisdiction. That's another clue. It's telling us that its jurisdiction is exclusive to the states. So it has a right. It's saying this is the agreement. We have the right to make all the laws for the federal lands, okay? Now I'm going to read you a couple things. Here. So this is on federalism, and it's on the Federalist number 45. Now, keep in mind what I've explained to you, because it says basically what I'm telling you here in Federalist 45, but then it contradicts itself in the analysis that the book does contradicts itself. So it says chapter 1 of the report, which is the report that I've been recommending everyone read, seeks to rescue federalism from the definitional confusion that has come to surround it. Federalism, as understood by the framers of the Constitution, requires a definition that the authority of the national government extends to a few enumerated powers only, and that all powers not delegated by the states to the national government nor denied to the states by the Constitution are reserved to the states. James Madison in Federalist number 45 stated, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined." Okay? These are the powers delegated to the federal government. Those which are to remain in these state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, ... The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. This understanding of federalism is made explicit in the Constitution by the 10th Amendment. Federalism is a constitutionally based structure theory of government designed to ensure political freedom and responsive democratic government in a large and diverse society. Okay? So, the things that they do are for defense with a C, to fortify, okay? So, to me, it doesn't make sense that in a time of peace, when there really should not even be anyone in Congress, that they would be there to regulate commerce between states and foreign countries. That they would do that only during a time of war, because in a time of war, you need to know what's going in and coming out and what you need to have. In a time of, we have a standing army now. There's no requirement for a standing army. It will be really hard to get away from a standing army because so many people depend on that income now. And if they did away with the standing army and only had a few officers on the military posts, there would be a lot of people out of work. So they have to keep us in a constant state of fear that somebody is going to come get us, whether it be the Chinese or the Russians or Europe or wherever, aliens. We have to always be scared so that we feel like we need this to constantly be stood up and active. If you look also in the Constitution, I forget where exactly it is right now, but the founders said that the Congress really only needed to meet once a year. And they gave, I think they gave a date, and then they said that they could change the date later if they wanted, which is another clue to tell us that the founders didn't expect Congress to be in session 5 days a week, all year long, except for holidays. So, yeah, a lot of what we think is true just doesn't even make sense. Also in the report, in the preface, it says that a study be undertaken with a view toward resolving problems arising out of the jurisdictional status of federally owned areas within the federal states. Okay, so that's what this report is trying to figure out, is the jurisdictional status of the federally owned areas within the states. And this is where I get this information from, along with a lot of other things. So if you read this, you may not come to the exact same conclusions that I have, but I've gone to the effort of even defining of and legislation and certain ideas, phrases such as citizen of the United States, which the Constitution only talks of citizens of the United States. But if you look at the tax code, it says United States citizens. And we can't just assume that both those mean the same thing. They may, but let's not assume that. So let's look at Federal Register 43256. I'm sorry, that's page 43256, Federal Register, volume 64, number 153, Tuesday, August 10th, 1999, a presidential document, and the document is the Executive Order 13132, and it defines federalism: acts of the national government, whether legislative, executive, or judicial in nature, that exceed the enumerated powers of that federal government, this government within the United States, under the Constitution, violate the principle of federalism established by the framers. So acts of the national government, whether legislative, executive, or judicial in nature, that exceed the enumerated powers of that government under the Constitution, violate the principle of federalism established by the framers. It's a violation. All of the titles not made law or the requirement to pay taxes are a violation of the Constitution and the ideas of principles of federalism. Okay? Executive Order 13132, Federal Register, Volume 64, number 153, Tuesday, August 10th, 1999, Presidential Documents, page 43256. 1999, and we're still paying taxes. Let's see, I've got a couple more papers here, I think. Okay, so jurisdiction over federal areas within the state. Okay, so let me read this to you. This is chapter 1, online or outline of study. The instant study was occasioned by the denial of a group of children of federal employees, officers or military, okay? Officers or military. Okay, and then employees are civilians, okay? The civil citizen is my understanding. On federal lands, but also having a private life. No private life, okay. Employees, okay, so a group of children of federal employees residing, there's a good word, residing this may be annoying to some people that I keep stopping. Residing on the grounds, federal lands, of a Veterans Administration hospital, of the opportunity of attending public schools in the town in which the hospital was located. In the town off federal lands on which the hospital where the employees worked on federal lands was located. Okay, now, let's see if I get my map here. Let's pretend we're all in Texas at the time. Okay, here's Texas. Let's say you just have a base right here. They worked on the federal lands. They wanted to go off post. Want to go off post and send their kids to the school, the public school, belonging to the state, which is not state of Texas, is Republic of Texas, okay? State of Texas is something different. It's a legal construct that administers contracts between the feds and the state, okay? So they wanted to send their kids off the military post, which is the Veterans Hospital, the federal lands, to a school belonging to the free people in the state. The one people, we call that the one people. Not we the people. We're not we the people. We're the one people. Okay? An administrative decision against the children on federal lands, I put that in, on federal lands, against the children was affirmed by the state courts, they call them local courts, finally including the Supreme Court of the state. The Supreme Court of the state said, no, you on federal land cannot send your children, your dependent children, off federal lands to go to our schools. That was the creation of the legal state. Because the federal government said, we want to send our kids to your school. And the people were like, no, you can't send your kids here. You go over there. You wanted that land. We annexed that land to you. That's not enough for you, or what? You want more now? You want to send your kid? No. And then the federal government came back and said, well, we'll give you some money. So now we have a business contract which is the legal state. Okay? Those business contracts are not administered in constitutional courts because the business contracts are not constitutional. Okay, so the decisions were based on the ground that the residents of the area on which the hospital was located were not residents of the state. They were residents of the federal lands to the exclusion of the states, just like they didn't come under our laws. So why do they get to go to our schools? They come under federal laws. They need to make their own schools. Which is one reason why I think they had to come outside of their own power to tax all of us so that they can build up their military with hospitals, fire departments, schools, such and such, okay? Because they're supposed to have their own system. Okay, so the decisions were based on the ground that residents of the area, federal lands, federal area within the state, on which the hospital was located were not residents of the state, since exclusive legislative jurisdiction over such area had been ceded by the state to the federal government, and therefore they are not entitled to the privileges of the state. Okay, the privileges of state residency. Okay, they're not entitled to our state stuff. How the hell are they entitled to our money if they weren't even entitled to send their kids to our schools? How are they entitled to make a law called law enforcement and send the law enforcement with an oath to the Constitution out to press their business contracts against us when they don't? Their oath requires them to follow the Constitution. It doesn't make any sense. How are they telling us we have to get a COVID test? How are they telling us we have to get a vaccine? They weren't even allowed to send their kids to our schools because they don't have privileges of the state, and we don't have the privilege or the requirement to follow the laws on the federal lands. We're not on federal lands. Okay? And that's all I have for reading. And so now, where can you find this at? Where can you find this book that tells you all this great information on why you're free and why you don't have to follow these business contracts? Okay, so you go to a website. It's called hathitrust.org. hathitrust.org. And in the search bar, search for jurisdiction over federal areas within the state. The federal areas are within the state. The Congress is within the United States. Okay, now there's part 1 and there's part 2. Don't be worried that the reports are big, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff in there, some charts and different things that you can just skip right over. Part 1, part 2, printed by the federal government, written by the federal government, a commission put together by Eisenhower. Part 1, published in 1956. Part 2, published in 1957. Get those out. Read a page a day or a couple pages a day and just think about it and come back and watch these videos, and you'll have a much greater understanding of why you're not, we the people, why you don't have a limitation of rights called the Bill of Rights. You're not guaranteed those. You're guaranteed all your rights because some people who take an oath give up most of theirs, are promised 10, and come under this. Okay? Everything else belongs to the states and the people of the states. This stuff is for these people on federal lands. Okay? So there you have it. Consider liking, sharing, subscribing. Please share. The more people that can understand this, the better off we're all going to be. And maybe the sooner we can get to a point where people understand this, the more we can stop the forced vaccines, the forced COVID tests, the forced use of a fictional currency, a fiat currency based on debt. The more we can get back to true wealth, real wealth, a large middle class, and all the things that Ron Paul talks about. Free market, okay? Free schools, not free schools, but the right to homeschool, the right to teach your children what you want, regaining control of our schools. Because once the federal government legal contracts are done away with, and the federal lands don't need to contract with us for all their stuff on post, their essential services, the more we can get rid of all of those unconstitutional, non-positive, without authority titles that they keep trying to push on us. So please like, share, subscribe.